compliance officer is not your friend. They're there to protect the firm, and they're not there to protect the individual advisors. Once you're on a heightened supervisory plan, there's an old axiom that came out of the regulators that most compliance officers think, and they're like, if you give me enough time and I analyze any team's book of business, I'll find violations. And so when you're under heightened supervision, that's almost the goal. A word to the wise, hire a lawyer that has substantial regulatory defense experience. Think about, what is my plan B and C after this process is finished?
Brian is one of, if not the premier securities attorneys in the nation. You've been doing this for a long time, Brian. You're a true expert and a pioneer and also in the business. So really appreciate you having on today.
Happy to get on with you again.
Topic of conversation today is heightened supervision. And heightened supervision at these big banks, at Morgan, at DBS, and Merrill, and others, is a continuous issue and concern amongst advisors and the implications of being on heightened supervision. It's not public information that one is on heightened supervision, unless, of course, they're looking to exit. And what is heightened supervision? Why is it becoming so prevalent? What's the risk associated with advisors' practices?
What is heightened supervision? It is a formalized process that FINRA has indicated to broker-dealers that they're required to do if they think certain things are true. FINRA has published what they would call a non-exhaustive list of factors that firms should consider. Amongst them are, have there been consumer-initiated complaints, arbitrations, such that the firm is kind of on notice that there may be a problem with the individual financial advisor sales practices. Did the firm, when they hired the individual, see there might have been a couple of yes answers on this FA's histories? Roger, you and I have been around long enough. We knew advisors that had yes answers from the crash in '87, right? And then we had advisors who had issues with, the tech bubble bursting in 2000. But, FINRA will look at an advisor's CRD, and they may see 3 or more yes answers, even if they're, spaced out decades. Has there been previously imposed discipline? Did you have an advisor that, was on heightened supervision in the past? Were they terminated for cause once in the past? They even say, are there criminal disclosures? And then they're saying to the firms, you need to put into place a formalized heightened supervisory plan. And in that, the financial advisor is going to get a copy of what that heightened supervisory plan is. The financial advisor should review it carefully and understand what's involved. And from my perspective, and I think for your perspective, when we see advisors, they want to make sure that that plan has an end game. A lot of times we'll get retained by an advisor and they'll say, hey, I'm thinking of moving from my firm and I'm talking to a couple different firms. I've talked to Roger. I got people calling me. I have a friend of mine who's over at this other firm. And one of the questions I get asked is, are you under heightened supervision? And they'll say to me, I remember something about 6 months ago. My manager told me it was a non-event. It was a nothing burger. Just sign off on this thing and the problems would go away. And then, my ears and my radar go off and I say, well, there's no such thing as nothing burger, heightened supervision. One of the questions on a Form U5 that a firm has to complete is, was the advisor under heightened supervision or were they under an investigatory process when they resigned? And most firms on the street, all the reputable firms, when they're interviewing you, they're going to ask you if you're under heightened supervision. And a lot of the advisors that we counsel over the years that really weren't informed about the importance of that process when they entered into it. So I think one of the things everyone should think about is if you're ever approached by your supervisor or by anyone at the firm and they mentioned a heightened supervisory process, that's something that you should understand is serious. It has implications for your ability to move between firms. And in all likelihood, you should probably retain counsel to review the proposed terms of that heightened supervision and to maybe negotiate the length of it and what's involved.
But what we're seeing more and more, Brian, is firms instituting their own heightened supervision rules and regulations that have nothing necessarily to do with FINRA, making an excuse that it might be FINRA, and putting them on heightened supervision, whether or not it's not taking their annual exams on time, innocuous things that advisors do, not out of consciousness, but there's a little bit of unconsciousness. And so if you could talk about that and the ramifications of that.
If you were to get together 20 years ago with a bunch of really good advisors from Merrill, Morgan, UBS, you name it, and one of them's like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? He's under heightened supervision. The response would have been like, wow, like what did he do, right? Like it must have been a real abuse. And now, if you were to get that same group together, you'll probably hear all of them know someone at their firm who got put under heightened supervision for something they thought was, maybe a little shortcut was taken that was client centric. They were doing something that really was going to benefit their client. And they got frustrated with a firm rule that was, in their mind's eye, slowing them down from doing so. So that advisor, took a shortcut and accomplished what the investor really wanted, and it was good for the investor. And then all of a sudden you have, someone who was like a 24-year-old compliance officer who's, some life experiences, has never even dealt with a client, is coming through and second guessing every part of that process and suggesting heightened supervision. And the advisor throws their hands up and says, whatever, young guy, I'll go under this heightened supervision, leave me alone. And then that advisor signing off on something that they don't even really understand the import of, because their manager's telling them, oh, don't worry about it. You took a shortcut. Or even worse, someone on your team took a shortcut. These internal heightened supervisory agreements, nonetheless, can be career altering, at least in the short term, because it could handcuff your ability to move firms.
These are not young advisors. I'm coming across more 5, 10, 15, $20 million producers who have been in the business for 20, 30, 40 years, or all of a sudden on heightened supervision, and they're like, why?
You're exactly right that the regulatory scheme has been pushed down onto these larger firms, and we've been retained by teams with $10 million plus production, with 25 plus years experience, who are under heightened supervision for stuff that 20 years ago would have never occurred. Again, a lot of it is client centric shortcuts, maybe the cumulative effect of a few other little shortcuts where, again, there's no customer complaint, there's no customer harm, and yet you have a heightened supervisory plan that many of the those affected by did not understand the impact it could have on them.
How well does a typical heightened supervision last for? I guess there's no typical, but what are you seeing as sort of the length of time?
I would say a year would be what we're seeing as typical. I have seen some where their request is for 2 years, and we have been able to negotiate that down to a shorter period. We have been engaged by significant teams where the heightened supervisory plan might have had, I don't know, 10 fairly onerous parts to it that we were able to negotiate down to, say, 5 that really focused on the issues at hand. Um, and a lot of them, they involve ongoing training that, the advisors were going to be subject to already. So we say, well, let's take that out of the plan. Let's make this just a little more simplified. The firm always has the discretion to come back and say, hey, as part of this plan, we realize you really do need a more in-depth one. So negotiating it down is frequently a very smart approach to these. We've had some where they were, negotiated down to 6 months, which give the advisors a lot more flexibility. In particular, the advisor feels that this was a firm-based problem, and their mindset is, I'll accept this heightened supervisory for a short period of time because I'll use that time to go, talk to Roger and others, and I'm going to talk to a couple other firms about getting out of here. And having the 6 months is not so long because the due diligence and the negotiating take that long. But compare that to a 2-year heightened supervisory plan. That's a significant career handcuff.
If the advisor does have an interest in exiting, how does that hurt their valuation to actually exit out of the firm?
It's a significant impediment to getting a market rate deal if you're under a written heightened supervisory plan. And in fact, the largest firms will routinely tell advisors to wait for that time period to expire prior to bringing them on. And the reason being, they feel that they would have to impose a similar heightened supervisory plan themselves. And there's cost associated with that for a firm. In fact, we've been focusing so far on the major firms, but I've seen heightened supervisory agreements put in place at the independent firms. And
Mm,
one of the things that you'll see at the independent firms is they'll require the advisors to pay for the increased cost of the
mm,
heightened supervision, right? Because in that model, as you know well, and I'm sure most of the folks tuning in here now, they're at a high payout. And so if you're at an LPL, a cash trust sanctuary, and you go under heightened supervision, they're going to come to you and say, hey, guess what? If we have to fly to your office and do these audits, we're going to charge you
mm.
$5,000 per audit. We're going to charge you $5,000, for the implementation of this. So there's a lot of issues associated with this that are short-term career handcuffs.
So those advisors who are listening, heightened supervision is a very serious affair. As innocuous as the violation may be, the process to exit out of heightened supervision, the onerous investigation into your book, the time horizon it takes, and also the impact on your potential exit if you do have any interest in exiting is impactful. And the key point, if you are on heightened supervision, hire an attorney to overlook it and treat it extremely seriously.
The compliance officer is not your friend. They're there to protect the firm, and they're not there to protect the individual advisors. Once you're on a heightened supervisory plan, there's an old axiom that came out of the regulators that most compliance officers think, and they're like, if you give me enough time and I analyze any team's book of business, I'll find violations. And so when you're
Mhm.
under heightened supervision, that's almost the goal. A word to the wise, hire a lawyer that has substantial regulatory defense experience. Think about what is my plan B and C after this process is finished.
Excellent advice, Ryan. Again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.